The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers as I watched Victoria Martinez step up to the microphone, wearing my success like a designer dress she'd stolen from my closet. The annual Innovation Gala was supposed to be my moment of triumph, but instead, I was watching my boss's lover claim credit for 18 months of my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. The crystal shattered against the marble floor of the Palmer House Hotel's grand ballroom, creating a sound that seemed to echo through my entire career. My name is Sarah Chun, and I've been a marketing strategist at Pinnacle Communications in downtown Chicago for 6 years. What started as my dream job slowly became a nightmare when my boss, Director James Harrison, began bringing his personal life into the office in the most unprofessional way possible. Victoria Martinez wasn't just any employee, she was James's secret lover, and apparently, his chosen successor for everything I'd worked so hard to achieve. The worst part wasn't just watching her advance undeservedly, it was realizing that my own hard work was being systematically erased and reassigned to someone whose primary qualification was sleeping with the decision-maker. Before we continue, I have exciting news for all of you watching. We're giving away a brand new motorcycle to celebrate reaching our subscriber milestone. All you need to do is subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and comment below telling us where you're watching from. The winner will be announced next month, so don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to ride away with something amazing. Let me take you back to where this whole mess began, because understanding the full scope of this betrayal requires knowing just how much of my life I poured into this project. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in March when James called me into his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling streets of Chicago's business district. The wind was howling outside, rattling the glass panels like angry spirits trying to break through, which seemed fitting for the storm that was about to enter my professional life. "Sarah, I need you to work on something special," he said, his voice carrying that tone he used when he was about to dump a massive project on someone. His desk was cluttered with client files, coffee cups with lipstick stains that definitely weren't from his wife, and framed photos of his family that seemed to mock the hypocrisy of his personal choices. "We've landed the Morrison Healthcare account, and they want a complete digital transformation strategy. This could make or break our quarter, possibly our year." Morrison Healthcare was huge, and I mean truly massive, in the Chicago business landscape. They operated 17 facilities across the metropolitan area, employed over 8,000 people, and served nearly 500,000 patients annually. They were looking to modernize their entire patient engagement system, moving from outdated paper processes that belonged in the 1990s to a cutting-edge digital platform that would revolutionize how healthcare providers connect with the people they serve. The contract was worth $2.8 million, and successfully executing this project would put whoever led it in line for a senior partnership position that came with a corner office, profit sharing, and the kind of professional respect I'd been chasing since graduating from Northwestern. I spent the next week buried in research, and when I say buried, I mean completely consumed by every aspect of Morrison Healthcare's complex organizational structure. I analyzed their current systems, studied their patient demographics across 17 different facility locations, identified every pain point in their existing processes, and mapped out the technological infrastructure that would be required to support a complete digital transformation. My small apartment in Lincoln Park became a war room, with whiteboards covering every wall, sticky notes creating rainbow patterns across my windows, and coffee cups creating permanent rings on every surface that wasn't protected by stacks of research documents. I barely slept during those initial weeks, surviving on takeout from the Thai restaurant downstairs, energy drinks that probably violated several health guidelines, and the burning determination to prove I deserved recognition in this company. My boyfriend David started complaining that I'd become a stranger in my own life, always hunched over my laptop, muttering about patient journey optimization and digital engagement metrics. My friends stopped inviting me to social events because they knew I'd either cancel at the last minute or spend the entire evening checking emails on my phone. The breakthrough came during a particularly brutal 14-hour work session on a Saturday night when the rest of Lincoln Park was alive with people enjoying their weekends. I was sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by printouts of patient satisfaction surveys, when I realized that Morrison's real problem wasn't just their outdated technology, it was their complete disconnect from their patients' emotional journey through the healthcare system. Healthcare isn't just about medical procedures, diagnostic tests, and treatment protocols. It's about fear that gnaws at your stomach while you wait for test results. It's about hope that flickers when a doctor explains treatment options. It's about vulnerability that comes with removing your clothes in a sterile examination room. It's about trust that develops when medical professionals treat you like a human being rather than a collection of symptoms and insurance codes. My strategy focused on creating digital touchpoints that would make patients feel heard, understood, and cared for throughout their entire healthcare experience. Instead of just digitizing existing processes, I was designing a system that would anticipate patient needs, provide emotional support at crucial moments, and create a sense of community among people going through similar health challenges. I called my approach compassionate digital integration, and it wasn't just a catchy name, it was a complete reimagining of how healthcare companies could connect with the people they served. The presentation I was building wasn't just charts and graphs showing efficiency improvements and cost reductions. It was a comprehensive vision for transforming healthcare from a transactional relationship into a genuinely caring partnership between providers and patients. For 3 months, I worked 18-hour days, weekends that felt like extended weekdays, and even took work on my planned vacation to my parents' house in Milwaukee. I'd sit at their kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework as a child, typing away on strategic frameworks while my mother tried to feed me comfort food and my father asked questions about work that I couldn't answer without revealing confidential client information. My social life completely disappeared during this period. I stopped returning calls from college friends, missed my cousin's wedding because I couldn't take time away from the project, and basically became a hermit whose only human interactions were brief conversations with delivery drivers and increasingly strained phone calls with David, who was beginning to question whether our relationship had any future if my career always took priority over everything else. The physical toll was just as severe as the social isolation. I developed chronic headaches from staring at screens for so many hours. My shoulders permanently ached from hunching over my laptop, and I gained 15 pounds from stress eating and surviving on takeout food. But every sacrifice felt worth it because I knew this project would change everything for my career. This was my chance to prove that I could handle senior-level strategic thinking, manage complex client relationships, and deliver innovative solutions that would set new industry standards. The first red flag appeared in late June when James started scheduling mysterious meetings that I wasn't invited to. These weren't typical client calls or strategy sessions where my absence might make sense. They were closed-door discussions in the conference room that would end abruptly whenever I walked past his office. I'd see James and Victoria huddled together over documents that looked suspiciously like my Morrison healthcare materials, their voices dropping to whispers when other employees approached. Victoria Martinez had joined our team just 8 months earlier as a junior account coordinator, a position that typically involved supporting senior strategists rather than leading major client initiatives. She had an impressive resume with experience at 2 smaller consulting firms in Milwaukee, but nothing in her background suggested the kind of strategic thinking required for a project like Morrison Healthcare. What Victoria did have was undeniable charisma and social intelligence that made her incredibly effective in client-facing situations. She had this way of walking into a room and immediately commanding attention, with her perfectly styled auburn hair that caught the light just right, designer suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a confident smile that made clients feel like they were the most important people in the world. She spoke with a slight southern accent that added warmth to her professional demeanor, and she had an impressive ability to remember personal details about clients' families, hobbies, and interests that made them feel valued beyond their business relationships. During team meetings, she'd ask thoughtful questions that demonstrated she was paying attention, and she had a talent for summarizing complex discussions in ways that highlighted everyone's contributions while positioning herself as a collaborative team player. What bothered me wasn't her success in building client relationships, it was how quickly she seemed to be advancing without putting in the grinding analytical work that everyone else had to do. While I was spending weekends analyzing patient demographic data and researching healthcare technology trends, Victoria was attending networking events, building relationships with senior partners, and somehow finding time to maintain a social media presence that showcased her professional accomplishments and personal brand. I tried to dismiss my growing suspicions as professional jealousy, but the signs became impossible to ignore as summer progressed. Victoria would mention details about my Morrison project during casual conversations that I hadn't shared with anyone except James. She'd make subtle corrections to my presentations during team meetings, as if she had inside knowledge about client preferences that I didn't possess. Most disturbing of all, she started scheduling one-on-one meetings with Morrison's executive team, meetings that should have been mine to lead given my role as the project's primary strategist. When I asked James about these meetings, he'd give vague explanations about relationship building and ensuring comprehensive client communication. But something about his tone suggested he was being deliberately evasive. The breaking point came during a sweltering July afternoon when Chicago's humidity made the air feel thick enough to cut with a knife and the office's aging air conditioning system struggled to keep up with the oppressive heat. I was working late in the office, fine-tuning my final presentation for the Morrison account, when I heard voices coming from the conference room. The building was supposed to be empty except for security guards, but I could clearly hear James's distinctive laugh mixed with Victoria's higher-pitched voice. Curiosity got the better of me, and I quietly moved closer to investigate what seemed like an unusual after-hours meeting. What I saw through the slightly open door made my stomach drop like I'd just gone over the highest peak of a roller coaster. James and Victoria weren't discussing business strategy or reviewing client materials. They were wrapped in each other's arms, sharing intimate kisses with the desperate passion of people who had been hiding their relationship for far too long. James had his hands tangled in Victoria's auburn hair, messing up the perfect styling she maintained during business hours. Her suit jacket was draped over a conference room chair, and her blouse was partially unbuttoned in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. They were speaking in whispered endearments, calling each other pet names that revealed an intimacy that extended far beyond professional collaboration. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid they might hear it, processing what this meant for my career, my project, and my future at Pinnacle Communications. James wasn't just my boss, he was also married to Patricia Harrison, a lovely woman I'd met at company holiday parties, with 2 teenage daughters named Emma and Sophie who attended private school in Evanston. Victoria wasn't just a rising star in our department, she was actively sleeping with the man who would decide my professional fate. The ethical implications hit me like a freight train carrying a load of concrete blocks. Every meeting, every decision, every opportunity that had been directed toward Victoria instead of me suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't about merit, performance, strategic thinking ability, or client relationship skills. It was about pillow talk and personal relationships influencing professional outcomes in the most corrupt way possible. I quietly retreated to my desk, my hands shaking as I tried to process the full scope of what I discovered. The preferential treatment Victoria had been receiving wasn't based on her professional capabilities, it was payment for sexual favors and romantic companionship. The one-on-one client meetings she'd been scheduling weren't examples of initiative and relationship building, they were opportunities James was creating to justify her increasing involvement in my project. Most devastating of all, I realized that my 18 months of intensive work, personal sacrifice, and career dedication were being systematically transferred to someone whose primary qualification was her willingness to have an affair with a married man who had the power to advance her career. I spent the rest of that evening and most of the following week documenting everything I could remember about the project timeline, my contributions, and the gradual shift in responsibility toward Victoria. I printed emails with timestamps that proved my involvement in developing strategic concepts, saved drafts of presentations that showed my analytical thinking, and created a detailed timeline that clearly showed my role in developing the compassionate digital integration strategy from its initial conception through its final refinement. I also started paying closer attention to the dynamics between James and Victoria during team meetings, staff interactions, and client presentations. Once I knew what to look for, their relationship became obviously apparent. They'd share knowing glances during discussions. Victoria would defer to James's opinions in ways that seemed more personal than professional, and James would advocate for Victoria's ideas with an enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to their actual merit. Other team members had clearly noticed the unusual dynamic as well, though nobody was willing to address it directly. Maria Santos, a senior analyst who had become a close friend during our years of collaboration, started making subtle comments about office politics and the importance of knowing the right people for career advancement. David Kim, one of our junior researchers, mentioned during a lunch conversation that he'd heard rumors about inappropriate relationships between senior staff members. The Morrison presentation was scheduled for the first week of August, and I assumed I would be leading it despite my growing concerns about Victoria's increasing involvement. James had initially promised me that this would be my moment to shine, my opportunity to demonstrate leadership potential to the senior partners and position myself for promotion to a director-level position. I had prepared for weeks, rehearsing every slide until I could deliver the presentation without notes, anticipating every possible question Morrison's executive team might ask, and polishing my delivery until it was flawless. I practiced in front of my bedroom mirror, recorded myself on my phone to analyze my body language and vocal patterns, and even recruited David to role-play as a skeptical client so I could refine my responses to challenging questions. 2 days before the presentation, James called me into his office with the kind of serious expression that immediately puts your nervous system on high alert. The Chicago skyline stretched out behind him, with storm clouds gathering over Lake Michigan, creating an ominous backdrop for what I somehow knew would be devastating news. "Sarah, I've been thinking about the Morrison presentation, and I believe it would be better if Victoria takes the lead," he said, not quite meeting my eyes as he delivered what felt like a professional death sentence. She's developed some innovative ideas that complement your foundational work beautifully, and her presentation style might resonate better with their executive team. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut by a professional boxer. 18 months of work, countless personal sacrifices, endless nights of research and analysis, and the complete destruction of my work-life balance were being handed over to someone who had joined the project in its final stages. But James wasn't finished delivering bad news that would fundamentally alter my career trajectory. "You'll still be involved, of course," he continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone people use when they're trying to soften a devastating blow while simultaneously twisting the knife deeper into the wound. "You'll provide support, handle the technical details, and make sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. This is still your project, Sarah. We're just letting Victoria be the face of it. Behind the scenes, support role, technical details, face of the project." Every phrase was a dagger to my professional ambitions and a denial of everything I'd contributed to the Morrison Healthcare strategic framework. I wanted to scream, to demand explanations for this obvious injustice, to threaten exposing his relationship with Victoria, but I knew that would only destroy my career faster than it was already being dismantled. Instead, I nodded quietly and agreed to whatever arrangement he thought was best, even though every fiber of my being was screaming that this was fundamentally wrong and professionally unethical. I walked back to my desk feeling like I was underwater, with sounds muffled and movements feeling sluggish and disconnected from reality. That night, I called my sister Jennifer in San Francisco, sobbing into the phone as I explained the situation in detail that probably violated several confidentiality agreements. Jennifer had always been my voice of reason, the person who could see clearly through emotional chaos and provide practical advice that actually made sense. She listened patiently as I detailed every betrayal, every unfair decision, and every moment I'd felt overlooked despite my contributions. I told her about the affair I'd witnessed, the systematic transfer of credit for my work, and the devastating conversation with James that had reduced me to a supporting role in my own professional achievement. "Sarah, you have two choices," she said after I'd finished venting and crying and raging about the unfairness of corporate politics. "You can accept this quietly and hope things get better, which we both know they won't, or you can find a way to make sure your work gets the recognition it deserves. But if you choose the second option, you need to be strategic about it. Emotional reactions will only make you look unprofessional and vindictive." Jennifer was right as usual. Her career in technology consulting had taught her about navigating complex office politics and professional challenges that required careful strategic thinking rather than emotional responses. If I was going to fight for credit, I needed to be smart about it, not just righteous and angry. I spent the next day developing a plan that would expose the truth without destroying my reputation in the process. The key would be timing, documentation, and making sure the right people saw evidence of my contributions at exactly the right moment. I couldn't just accuse James and Victoria of unethical behavior. I needed to demonstrate my expertise and ownership of the project in a way that would be obvious to client decision makers. The Morrison presentation was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Palmer House Hotel, one of Chicago's most prestigious venues with a history that dated back to the 1870s. Morrison Healthcare was hosting their annual board meeting, and they'd invited several potential partners to present their proposals during an elegant reception that was as much about relationship building as it was about business evaluation. This wasn't just a business meeting where executives would review PowerPoint slides and make rational decisions based on analytical data. This was a social event where relationships were built, deals were sealed, and reputations were made or destroyed through personal interactions and the kind of chemistry that develops between clients and service providers. Victoria spent the days leading up to the presentation rehearsing my slides, memorizing my talking points, and practicing the delivery techniques I'd spent months perfecting through countless hours of preparation. Watching her prepare to present my work felt like watching someone else try on my wedding dress. It was deeply personal and profoundly wrong, but I couldn't find a way to stop it without destroying my own career in the process. She'd commandeered the conference room for hours at a time, practicing presentations while James provided feedback and encouragement that seemed more personal than professional. They'd order catered lunches and work through detailed discussions about client management and strategic positioning, conversations that should have included me given my role as the project's original architect. The evening of the presentation, I arrived at the Palmer House early to ensure all the technical equipment was working properly and to familiarize myself with the venue layout. The grand ballroom was absolutely stunning, with crystal chandeliers casting warm, golden light over round tables draped in ivory linens. Original artwork adorned the walls, and the ceiling featured intricate moldings that spoke to the hotel's historic elegance and attention to architectural detail. Chicago's business elite mingled with cocktails, their conversations creating a sophisticated buzz that filled the ornate space with the kind of energy that comes from successful people networking with other successful people. I recognized faces from Chicago Business Journal features, LinkedIn profiles of industry leaders, and networking events I'd attended during my 6 years in the city's professional community. Morrison's executive team had positioned themselves at the front of the room, ready to evaluate the 3 competing proposals that would determine their digital transformation partner. There was CEO Margaret Morrison herself, a woman in her early 60s known for her sharp business instincts and no-nonsense approach to vendor selection. She'd built Morrison Healthcare from a single clinic into a 17-facility network through strategic decision-making and an unwavering focus on patient care quality. Beside her sat CFO David Kim, a numbers-focused executive who joined Morrison from a Fortune 500 healthcare company and was known for his rigorous analysis of strategic investments. VP of Operations Lisa Rodriguez completed their evaluation team, bringing operational expertise and a deep understanding of how strategic initiatives would impact day-to-day patient care delivery. I had spent hours researching each of these executives, understanding their priorities, concerns, and professional backgrounds, so I could tailor my presentation to address their specific interests and decision-making criteria. That research was now being utilized by Victoria, who had absorbed my insights without contributing any original strategic thinking to the project. Victoria looked absolutely stunning in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly student loan payment, which had become a significant financial burden since graduate school. She'd styled her hair in an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings that caught the light every time she moved, and her makeup was professionally applied with the kind of precision that suggested she'd invested in preparation for this crucial career moment. James stood near the back of the room, beaming with pride as if he were watching his protégé perform rather than observing someone present another person's work. He'd invited several senior partners from Pinnacle Communications to witness what he clearly expected would be a triumphant presentation that would justify Victoria's rapid advancement and his decision-making regarding project leadership. I positioned myself at a small table near the side of the room, ostensibly there to provide technical support, but really to watch my career dreams get handed to someone else. My laptop was open, displaying the original draft of the presentation, the version that still had my name on every slide, my contact information in the footer, and my personal analytical insights woven throughout the narrative structure. Victoria began her presentation with remarkable confidence, clicking through slides that showcased 18 months of my research, analysis, and strategic thinking. She explained the compassionate digital integration concept as if she'd developed it herself, describing patient journey mapping and emotional touchpoint analysis with the fluency of someone who had lived and breathed this project from its initial conception through its final refinement. Healthcare transformation isn't just about implementing new technology systems, Victoria said, echoing words I'd written in my original proposal and refined through countless drafts. It's about recognizing that every patient interaction represents an opportunity to build trust, provide emotional comfort, and create lasting relationships that extend far beyond individual medical appointments. The audience was absolutely captivated by her presentation style and the strategic vision she was articulating. Margaret Morrison leaned forward in her chair, clearly engaged with the comprehensive approach Victoria was presenting. David Kim took detailed notes throughout the presentation, and Lisa Rodriguez nodded approvingly at several key points that addressed operational challenges she'd mentioned during our preliminary meetings. Everything was going exactly as I'd hoped when I'd imagined myself delivering this presentation to Morrison's executive team. The strategic framework was resonating with their priorities, the analytical insights were addressing their concerns, and the implementation roadmap was providing the kind of detailed planning they needed to make a confident investment decision. But then Victoria made a crucial mistake that would create the opening I needed to reclaim credit for my work. During the question and answer session, Margaret Morrison asked about the specific research methodology used to identify patient emotional touchpoints throughout their healthcare journey. This was a detailed technical question that required intimate knowledge of the data collection and analysis process I'd spent weeks conducting and refining. Victoria hesitated for just a moment too long, a pause that suggested she wasn't completely familiar with the technical details underlying the strategic recommendations she'd just presented. "Well," she began, glancing quickly toward James for support. "We conducted extensive surveys and focus groups to gather comprehensive patient feedback across multiple demographic segments and facility locations." Her answer was technically correct but lacked the specific details that would demonstrate true ownership of the research methodology and analytical framework. Margaret Morrison's expression shifted slightly, the kind of subtle change that suggested she'd noticed the gap between presentation confidence and technical expertise that comes from actually conducting the research yourself. This was exactly the moment I had been preparing for during the weeks since learning about James and Victoria's relationship. I had spent countless hours developing the research methodology Victoria had just glossed over with generic terminology. I knew every survey question, every focus group insight, every data point that had informed our strategic recommendations, and every analytical technique I'd used to translate patient feedback into actionable business strategies. More importantly, I had the original documentation to prove my central role in developing every aspect of the strategic framework that had just impressed Morrison Healthcare's executive team. My laptop contained research files, analytical models, and presentation drafts that told a very different story about project ownership than the narrative Victoria and James had constructed. I quietly opened my laptop and navigated to the folder containing the original presentation draft, my heart racing as I realized this might be my only opportunity to reclaim credit for 18 months of intensive work. Every slide clearly displayed, created by Sarah Chun, in the metadata, along with timestamps that proved I developed this content months before Victoria had become involved in the project. I also had the original research files, complete with my personal notes, analytical insights, and the methodological documentation that demonstrated my expertise in patient experience research. The room was buzzing with networking conversations as the formal presentation concluded and the cocktail reception began. This was when real business happened in Chicago's professional community, when clients made personal connections with potential partners and formed the relationships that would influence their final decisions about strategic partnerships worth millions of dollars. Margaret Morrison approached Victoria to continue their conversation about implementation timelines and project management approaches, but I could see that she still had unresolved questions about the technical aspects of our strategic proposal. Victoria was handling herself well in the social networking environment, but there were moments when her lack of deep project knowledge became apparent to anyone paying close attention to the substance of her responses. I made a decision that would change everything about my career trajectory and professional future. Approaching the group casually, with my laptop tucked under my arm, I introduced myself to Margaret Morrison as the lead researcher behind the patient analysis methodology. If you have any detailed questions about our data collection process, analytical framework, or research methodology, I'd be happy to provide additional insights, I offered, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Margaret's eyes immediately lit up with interest, the kind of enthusiasm that comes from meeting someone who clearly understands the technical details underlying strategic recommendations. Actually, I do have some specific questions about your patient journey mapping process, she said, turning her full attention toward me. The concept is absolutely fascinating, but I'd love to understand more about how you identified the key emotional touchpoints and translated qualitative feedback into quantitative strategic recommendations. This was exactly the kind of detailed technical discussion I'd been preparing for during those 18 months of intensive research and analysis. I launched into a comprehensive explanation of my research methodology, describing the specific survey techniques I'd used to analyze patient feedback, the statistical models I'd applied to identify pattern trends across different demographic groups, and the innovative approaches I'd developed to translate emotional insights into actionable digital engagement strategies. I explained how I'd conducted over 200 patient interviews across Morrison's 17 facility locations, analyzing everything from waiting room experiences to post-appointment follow-up communications. I described the coding system I'd developed to categorize emotional responses, the correlation analysis I'd performed to identify key satisfaction drivers, and the predictive modeling I'd used to forecast patient engagement with different digital touchpoint strategies. Victoria stood beside us, clearly uncomfortable as I demonstrated technical expertise she couldn't match or even credibly discuss at a detailed level. James had moved closer to our group, his expression shifting from pride to concern as he realized I was positioning myself as the project's technical expert rather than remaining quietly in the background role he'd assigned me. Sarah has been instrumental in developing the analytical framework for this project, Victoria said, attempting to maintain control of the conversation while acknowledging my expertise in a way that didn't completely undermine her own credibility. Her research really forms the foundation of our strategic approach to digital patient engagement. But Margaret Morrison was now focused entirely on me, asking increasingly detailed questions that required the kind of intimate project knowledge that only comes from months of hands-on development work, late-night analysis sessions, and the kind of deep thinking that emerges from complete immersion in complex research challenges. I answered each question confidently, providing specific examples of patient feedback analysis, technical details about survey methodology, and strategic insights that clearly demonstrated my central role in creating the framework Victoria had just presented. I discussed the challenges of translating emotional journey mapping into technical requirements, the innovations I developed for measuring patient satisfaction across different digital touchpoints, and the implementation strategies I designed to ensure successful adoption across Morrison's diverse patient population. "This is truly remarkable work," Margaret said, looking directly at me with the kind of professional respect I'd been craving throughout my career at Pinnacle Communications. "The depth of your patient insights and the innovative approach to emotional journey mapping are exactly what we've been looking for in a strategic partner. I'm particularly impressed by your methodology for translating qualitative patient feedback into quantitative strategic recommendations that can actually be implemented and measured." The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, during which I essentially delivered a second, more detailed presentation about my project that demonstrated technical expertise Victoria simply couldn't match. Other attendees began gathering around our discussion, drawn by Margaret's obvious enthusiasm and the technical sophistication of the strategic framework I was describing in comprehensive detail. I could see James growing increasingly agitated as the conversation continued, his carefully constructed plan to credit Victoria with my work falling apart in real time. Victoria's discomfort was becoming increasingly visible as she realized that her surface-level understanding of the project was being exposed by Margaret's detailed technical questions and my comprehensive responses. Several other Morrison Healthcare executives joined our discussion, including David Kim and Lisa Rodriguez, both of whom began asking their own detailed questions about implementation challenges, budget requirements, and technical specifications. I answered each question with the confidence that comes from having developed every aspect of the strategic framework from initial concept through detailed implementation planning. The decisive moment came when Margaret Morrison made a request that would completely expose the true authorship of the project. "I'd love to review some of the original research documentation," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions based on thorough due diligence. "This kind of methodological innovation is exactly what our board is looking for in a strategic partner, and I want to understand the analytical rigor behind your recommendations." I hesitated for just a moment, knowing that sharing the original documents would definitively expose the true ownership of the project and potentially create serious professional consequences for both Victoria and James. But Margaret's request was entirely reasonable, and refusing to provide documentation would look suspicious and unprofessional. "I have the original research files and presentation drafts on my laptop," I said, making a decision that would fundamentally alter my career trajectory. "I'd be happy to show you the analytical framework, sample data, and methodological documentation that forms the foundation of our strategic recommendations." Opening my laptop, I displayed the original presentation draft with my name clearly visible in the footer of every slide, along with metadata that showed creation dates, revision histories, and author information that told a completely different story than the presentation Victoria had just delivered. The timestamps proved that I'd developed this strategic framework months before Victoria had even been assigned to the Morrison Healthcare account. Margaret Morrison's expression immediately shifted as she processed the implications of what she was seeing displayed on my laptop screen. The metadata showed a clear timeline of my individual contributions, the research files contained my personal analytical notes and insights, and the presentation drafts revealed the evolution of strategic thinking that could only come from the person who had actually developed the framework from initial conception through final refinement. "Interesting," Margaret said quietly, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone who had just uncovered a significant discrepancy between what had been presented and what the documentation revealed. "It appears that you were much more involved in developing this strategic framework than the presentation suggested." The group around us had gone completely silent, with conversations at nearby tables pausing as people sensed some kind of professional drama unfolding. Victoria's face had gone pale, James looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and several other networking conversations had stopped as people recognized that something significant was happening in our small group. I realized that I had just exposed the credit theft in front of exactly the audience who would be making partnership decisions worth millions of dollars. But I also knew this was my only opportunity to reclaim ownership of work that represented 18 months of my professional life and career development. "Margaret, I led the development of this entire strategic framework," I said, finding my voice and my confidence for the first time in months of watching my work be systematically reassigned to someone else. The compassionate digital integration concept, the patient journey mapping methodology, and all of the analytical insights that formed the foundation of tonight's presentation, these were the result of 18 months of research and development work that I conducted specifically for Morrison Healthcare. I continued explaining my role in excruciating detail, describing the countless hours I'd spent analyzing patient feedback, the innovative approaches I'd developed for measuring emotional engagement, and the strategic insights I generated through comprehensive analysis of Morrison's patient experience challenges. Every technical detail I provided further demonstrated the gap between my deep project knowledge and Victoria's surface-level understanding. Margaret Morrison looked between Victoria, James, and me, clearly processing the professional and ethical implications of what had just been revealed. The other executives from Morrison Healthcare had joined our group, along with several senior partners from Pinnacle Communications who had been networking elsewhere in the room and were now witnessing their company's credibility being questioned in a very public setting. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more private setting," suggested David Kim, Morrison's CFO, recognizing that a very delicate situation was unfolding in a very public space where business reputations could be damaged permanently. But the damage was already done, or perhaps I should say the truth was finally being revealed after months of systematic deception. Margaret Morrison had seen the original documents with my name and timestamps clearly displayed. She had witnessed my detailed technical knowledge compared to Victoria's surface-level understanding of concepts she claimed to have developed. Most importantly, she had recognized the fundamental disconnect between who had presented the work and who had actually created it. James attempted immediate damage control, stepping forward with the kind of forced smile people wear when they're trying to manage a crisis that threatens their professional reputation. "There seems to be some confusion about project roles and responsibilities," he said, his voice carrying the defensive tone of someone whose carefully constructed narrative was falling apart in real time. "Sarah and Victoria have been collaborative partners throughout this entire process, and we're proud of the team effort that created such an innovative strategic proposal." But Margaret Morrison was too experienced and too intelligent to accept such obvious deflection and corporate speak. She had built Morrison Healthcare from a single clinic into a 17-facility network by recognizing talent, evaluating authenticity, and making decisions based on evidence rather than political maneuvering. "Mr. Harrison, I think it's quite clear who developed this analytical framework and who simply presented it," she said with the quiet authority of someone who had built a successful business by recognizing genuine expertise and authentic contributions. "The question now is whether Pinnacle Communications values honesty and proper attribution in their client relationships, because that's exactly the kind of integrity we require in our strategic partnerships." The networking reception continued around us, but our small group had become the center of attention for anyone within listening distance. Other potential vendor partners were watching the drama unfold, probably grateful that their own presentations hadn't been subjected to such intense scrutiny. Several Pinnacle Communications employees stood at a distance, clearly aware that something significant was happening, but uncertain whether they should intervene in what was clearly becoming a career-defining moment for multiple people. Victoria finally found her voice, but her usual confidence had completely evaporated under the weight of having her lack of authentic contribution exposed in front of the client she'd been trying to impress. "Sarah did excellent research work that contributed to the overall strategic vision," she said, her tone defensive rather than gracious, her usual poise replaced by the awkwardness of someone caught in a professional deception. "But strategic development is always a collaborative process, and the presentation you saw tonight represents months of team refinement and client-focused optimization. It was a reasonable attempt at spin, the kind of corporate damage control that might work in internal meetings where politics matter more than truth. But the evidence displayed on my laptop screen told a completely different story, with timestamps, metadata, and documentation that clearly demonstrated my central role in developing every aspect of the strategy that had impressed Morrison Healthcare's executive team." Margaret Morrison turned to me with a direct question that would determine the trajectory of my entire career and professional future. "Sarah, if Morrison Healthcare were to move forward with this strategic framework, would you personally be leading the implementation and ongoing optimization of the Compassionate Digital Integration Program?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could feel the weight of everyone's attention focused on my response. I looked at James, whose expression made it crystal clear that answering honestly would have serious consequences for my employment at Pinnacle Communications. Then I looked at Victoria, who had spent months positioning herself as the face of my work while contributing virtually nothing to its actual development. Finally, I looked at Margaret Morrison, a successful business leader who was offering me a chance to claim ownership of my professional contributions and take control of my career destiny. "Mrs. Morrison, I developed this entire strategic framework specifically for your organization's unique needs and challenges," I said, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. "I would be honored to lead the implementation of the Compassionate Digital Integration Program, and I'm confident that my deep understanding of the analytical methodology, research insights, and strategic vision would ensure its successful execution and ongoing optimization. The room was completely silent now, with conversations at nearby tables stopping as people sensed that something career-defining was happening in our small group. James's face had gone from concern to barely controlled anger as he watched his carefully constructed plan collapse in the most public way possible. Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear entirely, her face flushed with embarrassment and professional humiliation. But Margaret Morrison smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had just identified exactly the kind of talented professional she wanted to work with. Someone who combined technical expertise with the courage to advocate for proper recognition of their contributions. "Excellent," she said, her voice carrying the finality of a major business decision. "I think Morrison Healthcare has found our strategic partner, and more importantly, we've found the right person to lead this innovative program. Sarah, I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss implementation timelines, project leadership structures, and the possibility of bringing you on board to oversee this initiative from within our organization." The networking reception continued for another hour, but the real business had been concluded during those 30 minutes of revelation and truth-telling that had fundamentally altered multiple careers. Margaret Morrison spent the rest of the evening asking me detailed questions about implementation strategies, timeline expectations, budget requirements, and my vision for expanding the Compassionate Digital Integration Program beyond their initial rollout to potentially other healthcare organizations. Victoria and James maintained professional facades for the remainder of the event, but their quiet conversations in the corner suggested they were conducting some serious damage control planning for the professional crisis they now faced. Other attendees approached me throughout the evening, congratulating me on the innovative strategic framework and expressing interest in similar analytical approaches for their own organizations. David Kim pulled me aside to discuss the technical infrastructure requirements for implementing the digital patient engagement platform, while Lisa Rodriguez wanted to understand how the emotional journey mapping could be integrated with their existing operational processes. These were exactly the kinds of detailed implementation discussions I had been preparing for during those 18 months of intensive development work. By the time I returned to my Lincoln Park apartment that night, my phone was buzzing with messages from colleagues who had heard about the evening's events through Chicago's surprisingly small business community. Professional drama travels fast in networking circles, especially when it involves major accounts, questions of attribution, and the kind of ethical issues that make people question the integrity of entire organizations. I sat in my small living room, looking out at the city lights reflecting off Lake Michigan and processing everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. 6 hours earlier, I had been a behind-the-scenes support person watching someone else present my work to the most important client of my career. Now I was the designated lead for a $2.8 million account, with the full confidence and support of the client's executive team and an offer to join their organization in a senior leadership role. But I also knew that my relationship with Pinnacle Communications had been fundamentally and irreparably damaged. James would never forgive me for exposing his favoritism toward Victoria and the ethical compromises that had characterized their relationship. The office dynamics would be impossible to navigate, and my long-term career prospects at the company were essentially zero regardless of the Morrison Healthcare success. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, prepared for whatever confrontation awaited me and whatever consequences would result from my decision to reclaim credit for my work. The office felt different somehow, with colleagues glancing at me with a mixture of respect and concern that suggested word about the previous evening's events had already spread throughout the company. James called me into his office before 9 a.m., his expression a mixture of anger, disappointment, and professional calculation as he tried to figure out how to manage the crisis I had created for his carefully constructed narrative about Victoria's contributions and rapid advancement. "Sarah, what happened last night was completely inappropriate and unprofessional," he began, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration and the kind of defensive anger that comes from having your ethical compromises exposed in public. "You undermined a team presentation, embarrassed a colleague, and damaged our relationship with an important client by creating unnecessary drama and confusion about project attribution." I had anticipated this conversation and prepared my response carefully, knowing that James would try to reframe the situation as my professional failure rather than acknowledging the ethical problems with crediting Victoria for work she hadn't done and the corruption of allowing personal relationships to influence professional decisions. "James, I answered technical questions about research methodology and analytical frameworks that I developed over 18 months of intensive work," I replied calmly, maintaining professional composure despite my anger about the systematic theft of my contributions. Margaret Morrison asked to see documentation that I had created, and I provided it honestly and transparently. The client deserved to understand the true source of the strategic insights they were evaluating. You sabotaged Victoria's presentation by grandstanding and drawing attention to project attribution details that should have been handled internally, he continued, his voice rising slightly as he realized that his attempts to make me feel guilty weren't working. Your behavior was selfish, divisive, and ultimately harmful to the team cohesion and client relationships that we've worked so hard to build. It was fascinating and infuriating to watch James reframe the situation as my professional failure rather than acknowledging that the real problem was his decision to credit Victoria for work she hadn't done because of their personal relationship. But I had expected this defensive reaction and was prepared to stand firm in my position regardless of the professional consequences. James, Morrison Healthcare specifically requested detailed information about the research methodology and analytical framework that formed the foundation of their strategic proposal. I replied, my voice steady and professional. I provided accurate, comprehensive answers to their questions, which ultimately secured their confidence in our ability to deliver results. The client is satisfied, the account is secured, and they've specifically requested that I lead the implementation process. James leaned back in his chair, clearly frustrated that his attempts to reframe the situation weren't working and that I wasn't accepting responsibility for what he saw as professional sabotage. The client relationship is only one aspect of this situation, he said, his tone becoming more threatening. We also have to consider team dynamics, professional relationships, and the long-term impact of last night's drama on our departmental culture and company reputation. What he really meant was that I had exposed his relationship with Victoria and the preferential treatment she had been receiving in exchange for sexual favors. But he couldn't say that directly without admitting to the ethical violations and potential sexual harassment issues that had created this entire situation in the first place. Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, with James alternating between attempts to make me feel guilty for sabotaging Victoria and veiled threats about the consequences of not being a team player in an organization that valued collaboration and mutual support. I listened patiently, responded professionally, and maintained my position that I had simply answered client questions honestly and thoroughly. The conversation concluded without resolution, though the underlying dynamics were clear to both of us. James made it obvious that my future at Pinnacle Communications was uncertain at best, while I made it equally clear that I had no regrets about ensuring proper attribution for my professional contributions and wouldn't apologize for advocating for myself. We agreed to discuss next steps after he had time to consult with senior partners about the Morrison Healthcare account and its implications for departmental staffing, though both of us knew that my days at the company were numbered regardless of any formal decisions about my employment status. I spent the next week in professional limbo, continuing to work on various projects while awaiting a decision about my employment status and trying to navigate office dynamics that had become incredibly awkward and uncomfortable. Victoria avoided me completely, taking different routes through the office and scheduling meetings when she knew I wouldn't be present. Other colleagues seemed uncertain about how to interact with someone who had become the center of office controversy, though several people approached me privately to express their support for how I had handled the Morrison Healthcare situation and their respect for my decision to advocate for proper attribution of my work. Maria Santos pulled me aside during lunch to share her perspective on the situation. Everyone could see what was happening with Victoria's rapid advancement, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. And everyone knew you had developed that strategic framework. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, even though it was professionally risky and potentially career-limiting. David Kim, one of our junior researchers, mentioned that he had heard rumors about inappropriate relationships between senior staff members long before the Morrison Healthcare presentation. People were talking about James and Victoria months ago, he said. What you did just brought everything out into the open where it had to be addressed. The resolution came from an unexpected direction that would change everything about my professional future. Margaret Morrison called me directly on Thursday afternoon, bypassing James and the normal client communication protocols entirely to discuss a proposition that would solve all of my career challenges while giving Morrison Healthcare the strategic leadership they needed. Sarah, Morrison Healthcare has been incredibly impressed with your strategic thinking, analytical capabilities, and professional integrity, she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had made a major decision. We're so confident in your expertise and leadership potential that we'd like to offer you a position as our Director of Digital Strategy, leading the implementation of the Compassionate Digital Integration Program from within our organization. The offer was absolutely stunning and completely unexpected. Morrison Healthcare was proposing to hire me directly, removing me from the politics and ethical complications at Pinnacle Communications while giving me the opportunity to lead the strategic initiative I had developed from concept through implementation. It was exactly the kind of career advancement I had been hoping the Morrison Healthcare project would create, just not in the way I had originally imagined. We believe that having the original strategist leading implementation from within our organization would ensure optimal results and give us the best possible chance of success, Margaret continued. You would have a team of analysts and project managers reporting directly to you, along with the budget and authority to execute the program exactly as you envisioned it during your development work. The compensation package was 30% higher than my current salary at Pinnacle Communications, with equity options that could become very valuable if the digital transformation program achieved its projected results. The benefits package included comprehensive healthcare, retirement contributions, and professional development opportunities that reflected their confidence in my potential for long-term growth within their organization. I asked for 24 hours to consider the offer, though honestly, the decision was obvious from the moment Margaret finished describing the opportunity. Morrison Healthcare was offering me the chance to lead my own strategic initiative, work for a client who valued my contributions and professional integrity, and escape the toxic dynamics that had made my current workplace unbearable. That evening, I called my sister Jennifer to discuss the opportunity and get her perspective on the long-term implications of leaving Pinnacle Communications under such controversial circumstances. She was absolutely thrilled that my decision to stand up for myself had led to such a positive outcome, though she was also concerned about how the situation would look to future employers if I ever wanted to change jobs again. Sarah, you took a huge risk by advocating for yourself so publicly, and it paid off better than anyone could have expected, she said, her voice filled with pride and excitement about my career breakthrough. But you also need to think about how this situation will look to future employers if you ever want to change jobs again, because professional reputation matters in the long term. She was right to raise the concern, but I realized that my professional reputation was actually stronger now than it had been before the Morrison Healthcare presentation. I had demonstrated technical expertise, strategic thinking, leadership potential, and the courage to advocate for proper attribution of my work even when it was professionally risky. Those were exactly the qualities that innovative companies would want in senior-level employees. I accepted Morrison Healthcare's offer the next morning and submitted my resignation to Pinnacle Communications effective immediately, though I offered to provide transition support for any projects that required my specific expertise or knowledge. James was clearly relieved to have me out of the office, while Victoria remained conspicuously absent from any farewell conversations. My last day at Pinnacle Communications was surprisingly emotional despite all the frustrations and ethical compromises that had defined my final months there. I had genuinely enjoyed working with most of my colleagues and felt proud of many projects I had contributed to over 6 years of professional growth and learning. Several team members approached me privately to express their support for how I had handled the Morrison Healthcare situation and their respect for my decision to ensure proper attribution for my work, even though it had created uncomfortable office dynamics and professional controversy. Starting at Morrison Healthcare felt like beginning my career all over again, but with the confidence and expertise that comes from 6 years of professional experience, and the satisfaction of knowing that my new employer valued my contributions and trusted my strategic thinking. Margaret Morrison introduced me to the executive team as the lead strategist for their digital transformation initiative, emphasizing my role in developing the analytical framework that had convinced them to move forward with the program. My first month was dedicated to assembling my implementation team and developing detailed project timelines for rolling out the Compassionate Digital Integration Program across Morrison's 17 facility locations. I hired 2 junior analysts with healthcare experience and a project coordinator with technology implementation expertise, creating the kind of collaborative working environment I had always wanted to lead. The program launched 6 months later to remarkable success that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Patient satisfaction scores improved by 42% in the first quarter, digital engagement metrics surpassed our targets by 30%, and Morrison Healthcare became a case study for innovative patient experience design that other healthcare organizations began requesting information about. The success attracted attention from healthcare industry publications, technology conferences, and consulting firms that wanted to understand our approach to digital transformation. I was invited to speak at 3 major healthcare conferences, and my strategic framework was featured in Healthcare Innovation magazine as a breakthrough approach to patient engagement. Margaret Morrison nominated me for the Chicago Business Journal's 40 Under 40 recognition program, citing my strategic innovation and leadership in transforming healthcare patient engagement through data-driven insights and emotional journey mapping. The nomination included details about my role in developing the Compassionate Digital Integration Program and my successful transition from consulting to client-side leadership. 1 year after leaving Pinnacle Communications, I received a LinkedIn message from Victoria Martinez that was both surprising and somewhat satisfying. She had left the company 6 months after my departure and was now working for a smaller consulting firm in Milwaukee in a role that was essentially equivalent to the position she had held before her rapid advancement at Pinnacle. Her message was brief and professional, congratulating me on my recognition in the Chicago Business Journal and expressing interest in potentially collaborating on future projects. I responded politely but didn't pursue further conversation, recognizing that some professional relationships are better left in the past, especially when they're built on foundations of ethical compromise and credit theft. James Harrison remained at Pinnacle Communications but was quietly moved to a different department after senior partners became aware of the circumstances surrounding the Morrison Healthcare account transfer and the ethical issues that had created the situation. The company implemented new policies requiring clear documentation of individual contributions to major proposals, along with ethics training focused on appropriate workplace relationships and professional attribution. My experience taught me valuable lessons about advocating for professional recognition, the importance of documenting individual contributions to collaborative projects, and the courage required to stand up for yourself even when it's professionally risky. But more importantly, it showed me that integrity and authentic expertise ultimately create better opportunities than political maneuvering and ethical compromises. 2 years later, Morrison Healthcare promoted me to Vice President of Innovation Strategy, with responsibility for developing new approaches to patient engagement across their entire network of facilities. I built a team of 12 analysts and project managers, and our patient experience innovations have been implemented by healthcare organizations across the Midwest. The Compassionate Digital Integration Program that started this entire journey has now been licensed to other healthcare systems, generating revenue that has funded additional innovation initiatives and established Morrison Healthcare as a leader in patient experience design. What began as my individual project has become a sustainable business model that continues creating value years after its initial implementation. 3 years after the fateful presentation at the Palmer House Hotel, I was featured on the cover of Healthcare Executive magazine as one of the industry's rising leaders in digital transformation. The article detailed my approach to translating patient emotions into strategic business initiatives and credited my work with pioneering new methodologies for healthcare innovation. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had remained quiet during that networking reception, if I had accepted the support role James had assigned me and allowed Victoria to receive credit for my 18 months of work. I would probably still be at Pinnacle Communications, working on other people's projects and hoping for recognition that might never come. Instead, I took a risk that felt terrifying at the time but led to professional opportunities one couldn't have imagined when I was working 18-hour days in my small Lincoln Park apartment. The decision to speak up for my contributions wasn't just about one project or one moment of recognition, it was about establishing the kind of career where my expertise would be valued and my strategic thinking would be trusted to lead important initiatives. My advice to anyone facing similar situations of credit theft or professional marginalization is to document everything meticulously, prepare thoroughly for opportunities to demonstrate your expertise, and be ready to advocate for yourself when the right moment presents itself. The truth has a way of emerging when clients ask detailed questions and when you have the knowledge to provide comprehensive answers that others cannot match. Professional integrity isn't just about following ethical guidelines, it's about creating workplaces where talent is recognized, contributions are properly attributed, and the people who do the work receive the opportunities to lead its implementation. Sometimes achieving that integrity requires taking risks that feel uncomfortable in the moment but ultimately lead to career outcomes that are far more rewarding than the situations you're trying to change. The most important lesson I learned is that your expertise and authentic contributions will always be more valuable than political relationships and ethical shortcuts. When you combine technical knowledge with the courage to advocate for proper recognition, you create opportunities for career advancement that are based on merit rather than manipulation. 5 years after that champagne glass shattered on the Palmer House Hotel floor, I'm now Chief Innovation Officer at Morrison Healthcare, leading strategic initiatives that impact over 1 million patients annually. The work I do today grew directly from that 18-month project that almost got stolen from me, proving that standing up for yourself can create career trajectories that exceed your wildest professional dreams.